The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the skeletal trees of the Montana wilderness, as snow piled high against the crumbling walls of a derelict cabin. Inside, Eleanor Grayson clutched her newborn twins, Henry and Rose, to her chest, their tiny wails barely audible over the storm's fury. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, her body trembling from cold and grief. Just 3 days ago, her husband, Thomas, had been buried beneath a makeshift cross in the frozen earth, taken by a fever that swept through him faster than the blizzard now battering their home. Alone, with no food, no firewood, and no hope, Eleanor whispered a prayer, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please, someone, anyone," she begged, as the storm threatened to swallow them whole. Eleanor had come west with Thomas 2 years prior, chasing dreams of a homestead, a family, and a life carved from the wild. They'd built this cabin with their own hands, laughed as they planted their first crop, and wept with joy when she bore the twins. But the land was unforgiving. A brutal winter had destroyed their harvest, and Thomas's illness had struck without mercy. Now, at 24, Eleanor was a widow, abandoned by the nearest settlers who'd fled the storm, leaving her with 2 fragile babies and a dwindling will to survive. The fire had died hours ago, and the last of the cornmeal was gone. She wrapped the twins tighter in her tattered shawl, their little bodies cold against her own, and fought the despair clawing at her heart. The world outside was a white void, and she feared they'd perish before dawn. Miles away, Caleb Holt rode through the blizzard, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind, his horse, Jasper, plodding through the deepening snow. A widower himself, Caleb was 32, a cowboy hardened by loss and struggle. 2 years earlier, cholera had claimed his wife, Mary, and their infant son, leaving him a shell of a man, drifting from ranch to ranch, drowning his sorrow and work. His weathered face, framed by a dark beard, bore the lines of grief, but his gray eyes still flickered with a stubborn spark of resilience. He'd been driving cattle when the storm hit, and now, lost in the whiteout, he cursed the cold that numbed his hands and the loneliness that gnawed at his soul. "Just keep going, Jasper," he muttered, patting the horse's neck, though he wondered if they'd both freeze before finding shelter. The night stretched on, and Eleanor's strength waned. The twins' cries grew weaker, and her own eyelids drooped, the cold lulling her toward a dangerous sleep. She jolted awake, panic surging as she realized the danger. "Stay with me, my loves," she whispered, rocking Henry and Rose, their tiny fists trembling. She'd heard tales of travelers lost to blizzards, of families found frozen in their beds. Desperate, she stumbled to the door, flinging it open to the storm's roar, and screamed into the void, "Help us!" The wind stole her voice, but she sank to her knees in the snow, clutching the babies, refusing to let death claim them without a fight. Caleb, nearly blinded by the snow, caught a faint sound, a cry, thin and desperate, carried on the wind. He reined Jasper in, squinting through the flurry. There, half buried in the drift, was a figure, crumpled and still, with 2 small bundles in its arms. His heart lurched, memories of Mary and his son flashing through his mind. He leapt from the saddle, boots sinking deep, and ran to them. "Ma'am! Ma'am, can you hear me?" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside Eleanor. Her face was pale as the snow, her lips blue, but her eyes fluttered open, wild with fear and hope. "My babies, please, save my babies," she rasped, thrusting the twins toward him. Caleb acted swiftly, scooping Eleanor and the twins into his arms, their slight weight a painful echo of the family he'd lost. He staggered back to Jasper, wrapping them in his coat and the horse's blanket. "Hold on, ma'am," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. The cabin was too far gone, leaking, fireless, but he knew of an old trapper's shack a mile off, if they could make it. The journey was brutal, the wind slashing at them, Jasper stumbling in the drifts. Eleanor clung to consciousness, murmuring to her twins, while Caleb's mind raced with dread. What if they didn't survive? What if he failed again? They reached the shack, a ramshackle shelter of logs and mud, and Caleb kicked the door open. Inside, he found a small stack of dry wood, a miracle in this storm. He built a fire, the flames crackling to life, casting a warm glow over Eleanor and the twins. She was shivering, her hands fumbling as she tried to nurse the babies, but her strength was gone. Caleb, awkward but determined, rummaged in his saddlebag for a tin of dried beef and a canteen of water. "Eat this, ma'am," he said, softening the meat in the water and pressing it to her lips. "You gotta stay strong for them." Eleanor nodded, tears spilling as she chewed, the warmth and food reviving a flicker of hope. A days past, the storm unrelenting, trapping them in the shack. Caleb faced challenge after challenge, the wood dwindled, forcing him to brave the blizzard to chop more, his hands bleeding from the axe. The twins cried constantly, hungry and cold, and Eleanor's milk was slow to come, her body weakened by starvation. Caleb hunted what he could, snaring a rabbit one lucky day, boiling it into a broth they shared. Eleanor, meanwhile, battled her own demons, grief for Thomas, fear for her children, and the weight of depending on a stranger. "Why are you helping us?" she asked one night, her voice trembling as the firelight danced across Caleb's weary face. He stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "Lost my wife and boy 2 years back," he said quietly. "Couldn't save em. Maybe I can save you." The confession hung heavy, and Eleanor reached out, touching his hand, a silent bond forming between two broken souls. But the challenges mounted. Henry fell ill, his tiny body burning with fever, and Eleanor sobbed, rocking him, terrified she'd lose him too. Caleb, desperate, remembered a trick from his ranching days, cooling a fever with snow wrapped in cloth. He tended the boy through the night, praying silently, while Eleanor watched, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. The storm finally broke on the 5th day, the sky clearing to a brilliant blue. Henry's fever eased, and Rose's cries grew stronger, a sign of life returning. But their ordeal wasn't over. The nearest town, Bridger's Hollow, was 10 miles away, and they had to reach it for supplies and safety. The journey was treacherous, snowdrifts hid ravines, and wolves howled in the distance. Caleb led Jasper, carrying Eleanor and the twins, his body aching, his mind haunted by doubt. What if they didn't make it? What if he couldn't protect them? Eleanor, too, wrestled with her fears, but Caleb's quiet strength steadied her. "We'll get there," he promised, and she believed him. They arrived in Bridger's Hollow, exhausted but alive, greeted by wide-eyed townsfolk who'd thought them lost to the storm. The local doctor took the twins, feeding and warming them, while a kind widow offered Eleanor a bed and a meal. Caleb, ever the loner, prepared to ride off, but Eleanor stopped him, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved us, Caleb. Stay. Please." He hesitated, the weight of his past clashing with the hope in her gaze. The townsfolk rallied, offering to help rebuild Eleanor's cabin, and Caleb, for the first time in years, felt a purpose beyond survival. Months later, the cabin stood strong, rebuilt by hands united in hope. Eleanor and Caleb worked side by side, not as lovers, but as partners, their bond forged in snow and struggle. The twins, chubby and bright-eyed, giggled as Caleb carved them wooden toys, a smile cracking his weathered face. Challenges remained, harsh winters, lean harvests, but they faced them together, a family born of loss and resilience. Eleanor looked out at the Montana sky one evening, the twins in her arms, Caleb at her side, and whispered, "We made it." The message was clear: in the darkest storms, hope endures when broken hearts find each other, building a future from the ashes of the past.